Have you ever witnessed a moment so shocking, so powerful, that it changed the way an entire room of people saw the world, and themselves, forever? Imagine a Christmas party, glittering with lights and laughter, suddenly brought to a standstill by the arrival of a woman everyone thought they could ignore. This isn't just a story about a holiday gone wrong. It's about pride, prejudice, and the unforgettable revenge of a grandmother who refused to be erased. What happened that night would echo through the lives of everyone present, teaching a lesson they'd never forget. Before we dive into this jaw-dropping true story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss more stories that challenge, inspire, and reveal the hidden truths behind everyday lives. Now, let's step into a world where one woman's courage turned a night of exclusion into a legend. It all began in the small, snow-dusted town of Willowbrook, where the holidays were more than just a season. They were a spectacle. Every December, the houses glowed with twinkling lights, and the air was thick with the scent of cinnamon and pine. But beneath the surface, not every heart was as warm as the fires burning in the hearths. Evelyn Monroe was a woman who had seen it all. At 72, she carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had weathered storms most people couldn't imagine. Her skin was the color of rich mahogany, her eyes sharp and kind, and her laughter could fill a room. She had married into the Monroe family decades ago, bringing her own traditions, recipes, and stories to the table. But not everyone in the family had welcomed her with open arms. Carter Monroe was a man of appearances. He liked things neat, predictable, and above all, comfortable. Carter had grown up in a world where difference was something to be tolerated, not celebrated. He had a wife, 2 children, and a circle of friends who looked and thought just like him. Every year, Carter and his wife, Lauren, hosted the grandest Christmas party in Willowbrook. It was the event of the season, an invitation coveted by everyone who mattered. Evelyn had always attended, bringing her famous sweet potato pie and her infectious spirit. But this year, something was different. The invitation never arrived. Days passed, and Evelyn tried to brush off the growing sense of unease. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe the mail was slow. But then, her phone rang. "Hey, Evelyn." Carter's voice was hesitant, almost rehearsed. "I, wanted to talk to you about the Christmas party this year." Evelyn's heart sank. She could hear the discomfort in his voice, the way he danced around the words he didn't want to say. "I'm really sorry, but you're not invited this year. Some of our friends and family, well, they said they'd be uncomfortable if you came. You know, because you're, different. I just don't want to make anyone feel awkward." The words hung in the air like a bitter frost. Evelyn felt the sting, not just of exclusion, but of betrayal. She had given her love, her time, her wisdom to this family. And now she was being cast aside because of the color of her skin. For a moment, Evelyn said nothing. She let the silence stretch, heavy and cold. Then, with a calm that belied the storm inside her, she replied, "Thank you for letting me know, Carter. I hope you all have a wonderful evening." She hung up, her hands trembling. But as the hours passed, the pain gave way to something else, a fierce, burning resolve. If they thought they could erase her, they were about to learn just how unforgettable she could be. Evelyn spent the next few days in quiet preparation. She called in favors, reached out to old friends, and made arrangements that would have seemed impossible to anyone who underestimated her. She wasn't just going to show up. She was going to make an entrance that no one in Willowbrook would ever forget. The night of the party arrived, and the Monroe house was ablaze with lights. Guests in sparkling dresses and tailored suits mingled, glasses of champagne in hand. Laughter floated through the air. But beneath it all was a tension, a sense that something was missing. Suddenly, the sound of engines shattered the night. Outside, a convoy of sleek black cars pulled up to the curb. The lead vehicle, a gleaming Rolls-Royce, came to a stop, and 50 uniformed security guards stepped out, forming a protective line along the walkway. The guests rushed to the windows, their faces pressed against the glass in disbelief. Who could possibly warrant such an entrance? The car door opened, and Evelyn Monroe stepped out, dressed in a gown of deep emerald green that shimmered in the light. Her hair was perfectly coiffed, her jewelry sparkling. She walked with the poise of a queen, her head held high, her eyes unflinching. The guards flanked her as she strode up the walkway, every step measured and deliberate. The front door swung open, and the room fell silent. All eyes turned to Evelyn as she entered, her presence commanding, undeniable. Carter's face went pale. Lauren clutched his arm, her mouth open in shock. The guests parted, unsure whether to greet her or hide. Evelyn paused in the doorway, surveying the room. She could feel the weight of their stares, the discomfort, the unspoken questions. But she was not here to beg for acceptance. She was here to claim her place and to teach them all a lesson they would never forget. A hush fell over the room as Evelyn stood in the entryway, her emerald gown catching the light and casting a subtle glow across the polished hardwood floor. The only sound was the faint clinking of ice in abandoned glasses. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The guests, so used to being the center of attention, now found themselves as mere spectators to a scene they could never have imagined. Evelyn's gaze swept the room, her eyes lingering on each face. Some looked away, unable to meet her steady stare. Others watched with a mix of curiosity and discomfort, unsure of what to do or say. Carter, still rooted to the spot, finally found his voice. "Evelyn, what are you doing here?" he stammered, his words barely above a whisper. She smiled, a slow, knowing smile that spoke of years spent rising above slights and insults. "I came to wish my family a Merry Christmas," she replied, her voice clear and unwavering. "And to remind everyone here that no one gets to decide who belongs and who doesn't." A ripple of murmurs passed through the crowd. Some guests shifted uneasily, while others exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of embarrassment and intrigue. Lauren, ever the hostess, tried to regain control of the situation. "Well, Evelyn, this is unexpected," she said, forcing a brittle smile. "We weren't prepared for extra guests." Evelyn's eyes sparkled with mischief. "Oh, I'm not just any guest, Lauren. I'm family. And I brought a little something for everyone." With a nod, she signaled to one of the security guards, who stepped forward carrying a stack of beautifully wrapped boxes. The guards began distributing the gifts, one to each guest. The packages were elegant, tied with crimson ribbons and embossed with gold lettering. The guests hesitated, unsure whether to accept the gifts. But curiosity got the better of them, and soon the room was filled with the sound of tearing paper and gasps of surprise. Inside each box was a mirror, framed in silver, with a note attached. The note read, "Look closely. The only thing that should make you uncomfortable is the reflection of your own prejudice." A stunned silence followed as the guests read the message. Some flushed with shame, others looked away, unable to face the truth staring back at them. Evelyn watched, her expression calm but resolute. Carter's face reddened. "Evelyn, this is inappropriate. You can't just come in here and—" She cut him off, her voice gentle but firm. "I can, and I did. You see, Carter, exclusion isn't just about keeping someone out of a party. It's about telling them they don't matter, that their presence is a problem to be solved. But I am not a problem. I am your family. And tonight, I'm here to remind you, and everyone else, what that really means. A few guests began to murmur their agreement, emboldened by Evelyn's courage. One woman, a neighbor named Mrs. Whitaker, stepped forward, her eyes brimming with tears. "Evelyn, I'm so sorry," she said softly. "I never realized how much it must have hurt to be left out. Thank you for making us see ourselves more clearly." Evelyn smiled warmly, taking Mrs. Whitaker's hand. "It's never too late to do better," she replied. "That's what Christmas is all about. Second chances, forgiveness, and the courage to change." The atmosphere in the room began to shift. The tension eased, replaced by a sense of introspection. Some guests quietly excused themselves, unable to face the discomfort of their own actions. Others approached Evelyn, offering apologies and words of support. But not everyone was ready to change. In the corner, a group of Carter's friends whispered angrily, their faces twisted with resentment. They had come expecting a night of comfort and conformity, not a lesson in humility. Evelyn noticed them, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she turned to the children, who had been watching the scene unfold with wide eyes. "Come here, little ones," she called gently. "Let me tell you a story." The children gathered around her, drawn by her warmth and the promise of something different. Evelyn knelt down, her gown pooling around her like a sea of green. "Once upon a time," she began, "there was a village where everyone looked the same, thought the same, and acted the same. They believed that anyone who was different was dangerous. But one day, a stranger arrived, a woman with skin the color of midnight and a heart full of light. At first, the villagers were afraid, but as they got to know her, they realized she brought gifts they had never imagined, stories, songs, and a love that made their village richer than ever before. Period. The children listened, captivated. Evelyn's voice was soft, but strong, weaving a tale of acceptance and transformation. "And do you know what happened?" she asked, her eyes twinkling. "The villagers learned that difference isn't something to fear. It's something to celebrate. Because when we open our hearts to others, we discover the true magic of Christmas." The children clapped, their faces alight with wonder. Evelyn hugged them, her heart swelling with hope. Across the room, Carter watched, his expression conflicted. He saw the way the children gravitated toward Evelyn, the way the guests were beginning to question their own assumptions. For the first time, he wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. Evelyn rose, her presence commanding once more. She addressed the room, her voice ringing out clear and strong. "Tonight, I didn't come here to ruin your party. I came to remind you that love is bigger than fear, and family is stronger than prejudice. If you can't see that, then maybe it's time to look in the mirror and ask yourself why." The room was silent, the weight of her words settling over everyone like a blanket of snow. Some guests wept quietly, others stood in stunned silence. But one thing was certain. No one would ever forget the night Evelyn Monroe walked into that Christmas party and changed everything. As the echoes of Evelyn's words faded, the party seemed to hang in a delicate balance. The air was thick with the scent of pine and the unspoken realization that something profound had just happened. For a moment, no one moved. The Christmas music, which had been playing softly in the background, now seemed out of place, too cheerful, too oblivious to the storm that had swept through the Monroe home. Evelyn stood tall, her eyes meeting those of every guest who dared to look her way. She was not angry, not bitter, just resolute. She had spent a lifetime learning how to carry herself with grace in the face of ignorance, and tonight She wore that grace like armor. Carter, still reeling, tried to regain his composure. He cleared his throat, searching for the right words, but found none. The silence pressed in on him, heavier than any snowdrift outside. He glanced at Lauren, who looked away, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. It was Lauren's mother, Mrs. Davenport, who finally broke the silence. She was a woman of old money and older opinions, her hair perfectly coiffed, and her pearls gleaming in the candlelight. She stepped forward, her voice trembling with a mix of indignation and uncertainty. "Evelyn, I think you've made your point," she said, her tone clipped. "But this is our family's tradition. We have always done things a certain way. Perhaps it would be best if you left now, before things become uncomfortable." Evelyn regarded her with a calm, steady gaze. "Uncomfortable for whom, Mrs. Davenport? For you, because you have to face the consequences of your choices? Or for me, because I dared to show up where I was told I didn't belong?" A few guests gasped at Evelyn's boldness, but she pressed on, her voice unwavering. "I have spent my life being told to wait, to be patient, to accept less than I deserve. But tonight, I choose to stand in my truth. I choose to remind you all that comfort built on exclusion is no comfort at all." The words struck home. Even those who had never questioned the status quo now found themselves shifting uncomfortably, their traditions suddenly exposed for what they were: barriers, not bridges. Evelyn turned to the security guards, who had remained silent and watchful throughout the evening. With a nod, she signaled them to open the doors to the grand dining room. The guests watched in confusion as the guards revealed a lavish feast, far more extravagant than anything Carter and Lauren had prepared. The table was set with gleaming silverware, crystal glasses, and platters piled high with dishes from every corner of Evelyn's heritage: gumbo, collard greens, cornbread, jerk chicken, and more. The aroma was intoxicating, rich with spices and memories. Evelyn smiled, her eyes shining with pride. "Tonight, I bring my own traditions to this table. Tonight, we celebrate not just Christmas, but the beauty of every story, every flavor, every life that makes this family whole." The children cheered, rushing to the table with delight. Even some of the adults, drawn by the irresistible smells and the promise of something new, began to gather around. The tension in the room began to melt, replaced by a tentative curiosity. Carter hesitated, torn between his pride and the undeniable pull of the moment. He watched as his children laughed and sampled dishes they had never tasted before, their faces lighting up with joy. He saw Lauren, her eyes softening as she realized the depth of what they had almost lost. Mrs. Davenport, however, remained unmoved. She stood rigid, her lips pressed into a thin line. "This is highly irregular," she muttered. But her protests were drowned out by the sounds of laughter and conversation. As the guests began to relax, Evelyn moved through the room, offering food and stories, her presence a balm to old wounds. She spoke of her childhood in the South, of the lessons her mother had taught her about dignity and resilience. She shared memories of holidays spent with loved ones long gone, and the importance of making room at the table for everyone. As the evening wore on, something remarkable happened. The guests, who had arrived expecting a night of sameness and safety, found themselves drawn into a celebration of difference. They listened to Evelyn's stories, tasted her food, and began to see her not as an outsider, but as the heart of the family. Carter watched it all unfold, his heart heavy with regret. He realized, with a clarity that cut through his defenses, that he had been wrong. He had let fear and prejudice dictate his actions, and in doing so, he had almost lost the very thing that made his family special. He approached Evelyn, his voice trembling. "Evelyn, I'm sorry. I was wrong to exclude you. I let other people's opinions cloud my judgment. Can you ever forgive me?" Evelyn looked at him, her eyes softening. "Forgiveness isn't a gift you ask for, Carter. It's something you earn. But tonight is a start." Carter nodded, tears in his eyes. He hugged Evelyn, holding her tightly as if afraid she might slip away. The guests watched, some wiping away tears of their own. Lauren joined them, her voice choked with emotion. "Evelyn, I'm so sorry. We need you. Our family isn't whole without you." Evelyn smiled, embracing Lauren as well. Family is about more than blood. It's about love, respect, and the courage to do what's right, even when it's hard. The room erupted in applause, the sound echoing through the house like a benediction. The party, once marked by exclusion and discomfort, had been transformed into a celebration of unity and hope. But Evelyn wasn't finished. She had one more lesson to teach, one more act of unforgettable revenge, not out of malice, but out of love. She turned to the guests, her voice ringing out with authority. "Tonight, you have a choice. You can return to your old ways, clinging to comfort and fear. Or you can open your hearts and minds and build a family and a community where everyone belongs. The choice is yours. But remember, the world is watching, and so are your children." The guests looked at one another, the weight of her words settling over them. Some nodded, their faces alight with newfound understanding. Others remained silent, their hearts not yet ready to change. But one thing was certain. No one would ever forget the night Evelyn Monroe walked into that Christmas party and turned it upside down. As the night deepened, the Monroe house glowed with a new kind of warmth. The laughter that now filled the rooms was different, less forced, more genuine. The guests, who had arrived expecting a night of sameness, found themselves swept up in a celebration that was richer and more meaningful than any they'd known before. Evelyn's feast became the centerpiece, her stories the thread that wove everyone together. But not everyone was ready to let go of old ways. In the corner, Mrs. Davenport and a few of her friends huddled together, their voices low and tense. They whispered about tradition, about propriety, about how things used to be. Their words were sharp, but their eyes betrayed uncertainty. The world they had always known was shifting beneath their feet, and they didn't know how to stop it. Evelyn noticed them, but she didn't approach. She knew that some lessons took time to sink in. Instead, she focused on those who were open, those who were willing to listen and learn. She moved from group to group, sharing laughter, wisdom, and the kind of kindness that disarms even the most stubborn hearts. At one point, a young woman named Grace approached her. Grace was new to the family, having married Carter's cousin just a few months earlier. She had watched the evening unfold with wide eyes, her own experiences of being an outsider still fresh in her mind. "Evelyn," she said softly, "I just wanted to thank you. I know what it's like to feel out of place. Tonight you made me feel like I belong." Evelyn smiled, taking Grace's hands in hers. "We all belong, Grace. Sometimes it just takes a little courage to remind people of that." Grace nodded, tears shining in her eyes. "I hope I can be as brave as you someday." "You already are," Evelyn replied, squeezing her hands gently. Meanwhile, Carter found himself in the kitchen, staring at the untouched platters of food he and Lauren had prepared. He felt a pang of shame, realizing how much effort he had put into appearances, and how little he had thought about what really mattered. Lauren joined him, her face thoughtful. We almost missed it, didn't we? She said quietly. Carter nodded. I was so worried about what people would think. I forgot what Christmas is supposed to be about. Lauren reached for his hand. Let's not forget again. Back in the living room, the children gathered around Evelyn, begging for another story. She obliged, her voice weaving magic into the air. She told them about her own grandmother, a woman who had faced even greater challenges and who had taught her that love was the most powerful force in the world. As she spoke, the adults listened too, drawn in by the sincerity and strength in her words. Even Mrs. Davenport, though she tried to hide it, found herself leaning in, her expression softening ever so slightly. The night wore on, and the party began to wind down. Guests gathered their coats and said their goodbyes, but no one left without first thanking Evelyn. Some apologized for their earlier behavior. Others simply hugged her, their gratitude unspoken but deeply felt. Outside, the snow had begun to fall again, blanketing the world in silence and possibility. The security guards, who had stood watch all evening, now relaxed, sharing smiles and handshakes with the departing guests. The Rolls-Royce gleamed under the streetlights, a symbol of the power and dignity Evelyn had brought with her. As the last guests departed, Carter and Lauren approached Evelyn, their children in tow. Carter's voice was thick with emotion. Evelyn, I can't thank you enough for what you did tonight. You didn't just change this party, you changed us. I promise, things will be different from now on. Evelyn looked at him, her eyes kind but firm. Promises are easy. Carter, change is hard, but I believe you can do it. I believe this family can be better. Lauren hugged her, tears streaming down her face. Thank you for not giving up on us. Evelyn smiled, holding her close. Family means never giving up, even when it hurts. The children hugged her too, their small arms wrapping around her waist. Evelyn knelt down, looking each of them in the eye. Remember, little ones, she said softly. The world is full of people who will try to tell you who you are and where you belong. Don't listen to them. You decide who you are, and you always belong, as long as you carry love in your heart. The children nodded solemnly, the weight of her words settling into their hearts. As Evelyn prepared to leave, Carter walked her to the door. The night was cold, but the air felt different, lighter somehow, as if a great burden had been lifted. Evelyn, Carter said, his voice trembling, I want you to know, you're always welcome here, always. Evelyn smiled, her eyes shining. I know, Carter, but tonight wasn't just about me. It was about all of us. It was about choosing love over fear and courage over comfort. She stepped outside, the snow crunching beneath her feet. The security guards opened the car door for her. But before she got in, she turned back to the house one last time. Inside, she could see the family gathered together, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of the Christmas tree. For the first time, they looked truly united. Evelyn climbed into the Rolls-Royce, the door closing with a quiet click. As the car pulled away, she watched the house recede into the distance, a small smile playing on her lips. She knew that not everyone would change overnight. Some hearts would take longer to open. But tonight, she had planted a seed of hope, of courage, of love. And she knew that, in time, it would grow. Back inside, Carter and Lauren stood together, watching the snow fall. They knew they had a long road ahead, but for the first time, they felt ready to walk it. The Christmas party was over, but the lesson would last a lifetime. The days that followed the Christmas party were unlike any the Monroe family had ever experienced. Word of Evelyn's bold entrance and the unforgettable lesson she delivered spread quickly through Willowbrook. Neighbors who hadn't attended the party heard about the convoy of security guards, the luxurious car, and the gifts that forced everyone to confront their own reflections. Some whispered in awe, others in discomfort, but no one could deny that something extraordinary had happened. Carter found himself at the center of attention in ways he never expected. At work, colleagues approached him with questions, some curious, others critical. "Did your stepmother really show up with 50 security guards?" one asked, half amused, half incredulous. Carter nodded, a rueful smile on his lips. "She did. And she taught us all a lesson we'll never forget." Lauren, too, felt the ripple effects. Friends called, some to offer support, others to express their shock. She realized how many people in their circle had quietly accepted the status quo, never questioning the subtle lines that divided their community. Now, those lines had been exposed, and there was no going back. But the biggest changes happened at home. Carter and Lauren sat down with their children, talking openly about what had happened. They explained why Evelyn's presence mattered, why it was wrong to exclude someone because of their skin color, and why it was important to stand up for what was right, even when it was uncomfortable. The children listened, their young faces serious. "Grandma Evelyn is the bravest person I know," their daughter said quietly. "I want to be like her when I grow up." Carter felt a lump in his throat. He realized that, for all his efforts to protect his family from discomfort, he had almost robbed them of the chance to learn what true courage looked like. Meanwhile, Evelyn's phone rang constantly. Friends, neighbors, even strangers reached out to thank her for her bravery. Some shared their own stories of exclusion and pain, finding comfort in her example. Others asked for advice, wanting to know how to bring about change in their own families and communities. Evelyn listened to each story with patience and compassion. She offered encouragement, wisdom, and, when needed, a gentle push to take action. She knew that real change didn't happen overnight, but she also knew that every conversation, every act of courage, was a step in the right direction. One afternoon, a letter arrived at Evelyn's door. It was from Mrs. Davenport. The handwriting was shaky, the words carefully chosen. "Dear Evelyn," it began, "I owe you an apology. I was wrong to judge you, to exclude you, to cling to traditions that hurt others. Your strength opened my eyes, and I am grateful. I hope you can forgive me and that we can start anew." Evelyn smiled as she read the letter. She knew it had taken courage for Mrs. Davenport to write those words. She penned a reply, simple and sincere. "Thank you for your honesty. Change is never easy, but it's always worth it. I look forward to building a better future together." The next Sunday, Evelyn attended church with the Monroe family. As she walked down the aisle, heads turned. Some people smiled, others looked away, but Evelyn held her head high. She knew that her presence was a statement, a declaration that she belonged, not just in the Monroe family, but in the heart of the community. After the service, Carter stood up and addressed the congregation. His voice was steady, but his hands trembled. "I want to apologize," he said, his eyes scanning the room. "I let fear and prejudice guide my actions. I excluded someone I love because I was afraid of what others might think. But my stepmother taught me that real love means standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. I hope you'll join me in making our community a place where everyone is welcome." There was a moment of silence, then a smattering of applause. Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes. She knew that not everyone would change, but she also knew that every step forward mattered. As the weeks passed, the Monroe family began new traditions. They invited neighbors of all backgrounds to their home, sharing meals, stories, and laughter. Evelyn's recipes became family favorites. Her stories, cherished memories. The children grew up knowing that love was stronger than fear, and that courage could change the world. But Evelyn never forgot the pain of that phone call, the sting of being told she didn't belong. She carried it with her, not as a wound, but as a reminder of how far they had come, and how far they still had to go. One evening, as she sat by the fire with Carter and Lauren, Evelyn spoke quietly. "Change is a journey," she said. "It's not about one night or one party. It's about the choices we make every day. It's about standing up, even when it's hard. And it's about never letting anyone tell you that you don't belong." Carter nodded, his eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you, Evelyn, for everything." Evelyn smiled, her heart full. She knew that her revenge had not been about anger or retribution. It had been about truth, about love, about forcing people to see what they had tried so hard to ignore. And as the fire crackled and the snow fell softly outside, Evelyn knew that the Christmas party they'd never forget was only the beginning. Winter's grip on Willowbrook lingered, but inside the Monroe home, a new warmth had taken root. The Christmas party had become the talk of the town, but for Evelyn, the true victory was quieter, deeper, a shift in the hearts of those who mattered most. Yet she knew her work was not done. The lesson she had delivered was not just for one night, but for a lifetime. A few weeks after the party, Carter and Lauren decided to host a community dinner, inviting not just friends and family, but neighbors from every walk of life. The invitation was clear. All are welcome. Come as you are. Evelyn helped plan the menu, blending her own recipes with dishes from other cultures represented in Willowbrook. The children made decorations, each one a symbol of unity and hope. The night of the dinner, the Monroe house was filled with people, faces old and new, voices mingling in laughter and conversation. There was no velvet rope, no whispered exclusions. Instead, there was a sense of belonging, the feeling that everyone, for once, truly had a seat at the table. Evelyn moved through the crowd, her presence magnetic. She listened to stories, shared her own, and watched as strangers became friends. She saw Mrs. Davenport chatting with Grace, their differences forgotten in the glow of shared humanity. She saw Carter and Lauren working side by side, their eyes meeting with a new understanding. As the evening drew to a close, Carter stood to speak. He looked at Evelyn, his voice steady and full of conviction. "Tonight, we celebrate more than just good food and company. We celebrate the courage to change, the strength to admit when we're wrong, and the power of love to heal old wounds. My stepmother, Evelyn, taught us that. She showed us that real family is built on acceptance, not exclusion. And for that, I am forever grateful." The room erupted in applause, but Evelyn raised her hand, asking for silence. She stepped forward, her eyes shining. "I want to thank you all for being here," she began. "But I also want to remind you, this is just the beginning. The real test comes tomorrow, and the day after that, when it's easier to fall back into old habits. Don't let comfort make you forget what you've learned. Keep your hearts open. Stand up for what's right, even when it's hard, and never, ever let anyone tell you that you don't belong." Her words hung in the air, powerful and undeniable. The guests nodded, some wiping away tears, others simply holding the hands of those beside them. As the guests departed, many stopped to thank Evelyn personally. Some shared stories of their own struggles, their own moments of exclusion. Evelyn listened, offering encouragement and hope. She knew that every story mattered, every voice deserved to be heard. Later that night, as the house grew quiet and the last of the dishes were washed, Carter found Evelyn sitting by the window, looking out at the snow-covered street. "Do you think things will really change?" he asked softly. Evelyn smiled, her gaze never leaving the falling snow. "Change is slow, Carter, but it starts with one person, one act of courage. Tonight, you took a step. Tomorrow, you'll take another. And one day, you'll look back and realize just how far you've come." Carter sat beside her, the silence between them, comfortable, full of understanding. He knew she was right. The journey ahead would not be easy, but it was one worth taking. As midnight approached, Evelyn rose and made her way to the door. She stepped outside, the cold air biting at her cheeks. She looked up at the stars, her heart full. She thought of all the times she had been told she didn't belong, all the doors that had been closed to her. She thought of the pain, the anger, the loneliness. But she also thought of the love she had found, the family she had built, the lives she had touched. Her revenge, she realized, had never been about humiliation or payback. It had been about forcing people to see her, to see themselves, to confront the ugliness of their own prejudice. It had been about reclaiming her place, not just at the table, but in the hearts of those who mattered. And as she stood there, watching the snow fall, Evelyn knew that she had won, not with anger, but with grace, not with bitterness, but with love. She had turned a night of exclusion into a lesson that would echo through generations. The next morning, Willowbrook woke to a world blanketed in white. Children played in the snow, neighbors greeted each other with newfound warmth, and the Munro family gathered for breakfast, their hearts lighter than they had been in years. Evelyn sat at the head of the table, her eyes shining with pride. She knew there would be challenges ahead, moments of doubt and struggle. But she also knew that she had changed the story, not just for herself, but for everyone who had witnessed her courage. And so, the legend of the Christmas party they'd never forget lived on. It became a story told and retold, a reminder that one person's courage can change the world. That love, when wielded with strength and conviction, is the greatest revenge of all. As the credits roll, remember this: the next time you're tempted to close a door, to draw a line, to decide who belongs and who doesn't, think of Evelyn Monroe. Think of the night she walked into a room that didn't want her and left it forever changed. Because sometimes the most unforgettable revenge is simply refusing to disappear.